Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Jessica Wingert. I'm the program lead for ClimateCAP. We're so glad that you joined us for Climate Markets and the Future of Business. As we get started, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to meet students from other schools. And as we go through the presentation, we'll ask you to use the QA function at the bottom of your screen for any questions that you have for Meeta. I'm joined on the call today by ClimateCAP co-founder Katie Cross, who will be helping to monitor questions and any kind of technical issues as we go. But today we are incredibly lucky to have Meeta Kothare from the University of Texas at Austin McCombs School of Business to lead our session today. I'm going to briefly mention ClimateCAP before I introduce you to Meeta. Hopefully most of you were on our kickoff earlier. If you weren't, you'll be able to go back to see that recording, but we do have a number of different programs. This Catalyst program is just one of the many. So want to encourage you to check out some of our other programming. You can find out more about all of that on our website and through our newsletter. I did want to highlight one specific aspect of ClimateCAP, and that is our Climate Connect program. And so we know how impactful it is for you to find your community of people who have similar interests as you. And in business school, that's especially true, especially when it comes to the job search and kind of career aspirations. So these Climate Connect meetups are a great way to find your community outside of your own MBA program with other students from around the world. So we have different themes for our different sessions throughout the academic year. We'll have a bunch in the fall. We'll also have some related to the summit in the spring. But more specifically, we're going to have one today to wrap up our first day of programming where we're going to be networking on by region. And then again on Thursday, we'll have one to wrap up the overall programming to network with students by industry interest. So I hope you join us for that and start to build those connections with your peers. And lastly, before I turn it over to Meeta, I want to thank our sponsors who have made ClimateCATALYST possible. We've got Deriva Energy, Apex Clean Energy, and Environ. And you can check out more about these organizations and their climate work through the links on our website. But for the reason you're here today, and that's to hear from Meeta. She is a longtime friend and supporter of ClimateCAP, and we're just thrilled to have her here today. I've shared Meeta's full bio as part of the registration page, so you can check out her long list of accolades. And I'm just going to let her jump right into this so we can get to hear part of this conversation. As a reminder, please use the QA function. We'll have about 10 minutes at the end to go through any questions that you have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Meeta.
Thank you, Jessica. And let me share my screen. Do you see it? Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm so glad to be here with all of you. Before we begin, I just want to start with a very, very quick disclaimer. Any views and opinions I express today are not from the University of Texas or the McCombs School of Business or the GSLI, which I lead, but my very own. And with that, let's begin. I think this morning you've heard about the science of climate. Let's talk about the business of climate now. Imagine this. It's February 2021, Texas. We are in the middle of a global pandemic and have been for a year. It's been below freezing for days in a state whose power grid was never built for it. And the grid fails. The lights go out, not for a day, but for a whole week. We have no power, but you still have to feed your family. So you drive to the grocery store. Now, I want you to think about this. Whether that grocery store is open depends on a number of factors. These are decisions that people made well before that storm happened. Whether there's anything on the shelves, whether the freezer's held, whether you can even pay when the card readers are dead, none of that is luck. Every piece of it was decided months or years earlier by people who were certain that they were not making a climate decision. Someone chose to put the distribution center where it was. Someone decided backup generators were worth the money, or they were a waste of it. Someone designed the refrigeration, picked the suppliers, drew the delivery routes. They were making ordinary calls, the calls we make with spreadsheets in hand, the kind you will be making 2 years from now. When the storm hit, like anything we've ever seen, a lot of grocery chains went dark. One mostly stayed open, and that was H-E-B, a large chain operating in Texas and Mexico. It has over 450 stores. So the question is, why did H-E-B stay open when some of the larger chains were not able to keep anything on their shelves? It was an interesting question, and it's very personal to me because I lived through Uri. Ours was the last street in the city to get our power back a week after it went out. This was not an ordinary storm. 700 people died. The grid came within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of a cascading catastrophic failure. So the question is, in something this big, how did H-E-B manage to stay open? And it stayed open because it made these decisions long before anything of the sort happened in Austin or Texas. Austin's where I live. It's not because they cared more. It's that they already had asked a question that the others had not. That question is the whole reason we're here. It's not about polar bears and it's not about politics. It's about asking a question that others hadn't. The question is, which of our ordinary business assumptions are quietly going away because of climate? Why are they becoming unreliable? And are you going to notice them before it is too late? And that's going to be the core of our conversation today. I'm going to try to do this without jargon. I know many of you are starting off your careers in this space and are interested, but haven't engaged with these issues in a business sense. But I think we can get there. So let me ask you to think a little bit. What field are you going into? Finance, marketing, operations, supply chain? You know what you're going to do, or maybe you don't. But keep it in mind because everything that lands is going to be because of it's going to land differently for you. Sorry, one more thing about this. The reason it is going to do that is because climate affects every part of a business's operations. It is an assumption that we're making, and it's an assumption shift that we need to make in every box of the business. H-E-B is not a climate company. It's a grocery store chain. The person who chose where to build was not making a climate decision, and that is the point. How did they get it right when others did not? So we want to sort of explore that within different business decisions today and see why climate becomes an important issue and how we can tackle it. So let's take a simple, ordinary retail decision. Should the grocery chain build a new regional center? Where and how? You can decide a very simple decision. It's not a simple decision, but you can decide it as business as usual. It's a warehouse, trucks come in, trucks go out, not a big deal. But it's not business as usual because we have climate risks and climate opportunities that have to be thought through when you come up with such a big decision. It's not just a real estate decision. It's not a simple supply chain decision. Climate has quietly changed the ground under all these decisions. So that's the whole idea of what we're going to talk about. You've got to ask yourself, what is the assumption that is changing and how are we going to think about it? So before we do that, let me just give you, and this is where, when I said I won't use jargon, I'm going to explain anytime I use it. So when we think about climate risk, there are decisions, or rather, climate risk affects decisions in two different ways. There's the physical risk of climate change, which is referring to just the physical climate itself. Heat, flooding, fires, storms, water stress, etc. The transition risk, when we talk about it, refers to how the economy responds to climate change. What technologies do we invent? What policies do we put in place? How do the markets shift? How do investors' expectations change? How do customers demand different kinds of products, and so on? What is a risk to one business could be an opportunity for another. So while I pose these as risks, keep in mind that these could be opportunities as well. And we will talk about those in a minute. All right. So think about where you might start. Take our grocery store example and think about where you might start. You start with a model, which is what we teach in the MBA programs. Someone has to justify this building now. So you've got to think about the cost, you've got to think about the revenue, what savings we might expect, how long the asset lasts. It's a 30-year building, say. So now we think about it as a 30-year model, we do our discounted cash flow analyses, and that's still relevant. But now you ask yourself, what are the assumptions that we're making here that are quietly becoming unreliable? If you look at the right column, you start to see them. Remember that every number you're putting in here is really a bet on the future. We dress them up as if they're facts in the present, but they're not facts. They are a bet on the future. They are sort of your foresight and your assumptions about the future. You're assuming that we're going to use similar kinds of power sources. You're assuming that maybe, you'll say, oh yeah, energy costs will go up with inflation and so on. Some pricing around that. Maybe you'll take into account something in the energy sector. But are you going to be taking into account a completely new source of energy? You're going to consider insurance costs. But hey, there are places in the world that are absolutely uninsurable right now. So how are you going to think about that? Are you going to assume that you can insure the building? What about the site itself? What about the building itself? We have so many innovations and so many regulations about the built environment today because of climate. Are you going to think about those? Are you going to ignore those because that's traditional finance? We're going to have to start thinking about how these rules change, right? And when you put that box, that number in the box, you have to think sort of sharply. What is this number talking? How is this number talking to me? Is this actually a clean number, or is it just staying quiet about the assumptions underneath it? And some of us saw these assumptions break, right? And all over the world. I know some of you are not here in the US, but I'll speak from my own experience. Reliable power was a quiet assumption all kinds of Texas businesses made until Storm Uri in February 2021. And that's when it stopped being an assumption and became a line item that someone forgot to budget for. And so the same question we will continue to ask, which assumption in this model is quietly becoming unreliable because of climate? And you don't have to answer it today. You just have to learn to see the assumptions and ask them, because most people are not asking those questions. So while we're inside this finance lens, many of you will want to go into finance in the MBA programs that you're in. One more thing that your first year classes will likely assume is that you will only be working in large corporates and working with one kind of money, which is commercial capital, priced to a market return. And that's most of it. But it's not all of it, because some of the money that is solving the most critical climate problems today are investments that don't quite pencil in on pure commercial terms. Their returns are too slow sometimes, but they're real. And they're not the kinds that typical investors can invest in right away. At least they can't move first. This is where a wider capital stack has to show up. Philanthropy and grants at one end, commercial capital at the other end, and something called impact investing and blended finance in the middle, where public or philanthropic money ends up de-risking the investments of private investors. And pay attention to that when you're in your MBA program. Most of you will train for corporates, and you'll be taught to think about these things as separate worlds. Business does business, philanthropy is done by foundations. But the line is really blurring fast. And people who can work across it, who can structure a deal that pulls in a development bank with a private investor, are rare and they're very valuable. So if you came from government or an NGO or the development world and you feel intimidated getting into the MBA program, remember that your experience is going to be an asset as we go forward. So, this is a big tent, and a lot of people are going to want to be doing this. So we talked about the money. Let's go ahead and build this thing. Now, for this grocery store, let's think about the design. Again, over the next 2 years, you will hear a lot about this in your operations classes, strategy, supply chain. You'll hear how to take cost out of the system because that's what businesses need to do to become profitable. You will hear a lot about making systems cheaper, leaner, faster. It's all about efficiency. But what happens? You're building that distribution center, you're making it efficient, you're doing all the smart things. You source from one region so that you have a really cheap source of supply. You pick the one supplier who's the cheapest. You run everything through a port that's close to your network of stores. You carry almost no extra inventory because just in time from Toyota has been around since well before my time in the mid 20th century. And we've been told that inventory sitting on the shelf is dead money, and we're trained not to like dead money. And this is a beautiful supply chain. It would win you praise in any operations class. Every single decision is correct. But now what happens? You suddenly have a supply chain dependent on one supplier or a few suppliers. You have a supply shock, and this efficient supply chain is not the most resilient. It's also the most fragile chain. And you'll be surprised how recently we were still thinking about supply chains that way. It was only the pandemic that started to get us thinking, okay, let's move to just in case rather than just in time. But it made the difference, right? If all the grocery stores had thought about keeping some inventory up there, they might have been able to stay open for 3 or 4 days into the storm. These are the kinds of decisions you've got to think about with climate. When we saw this in 2024, when the largest producers in the world of cocoa, Ghana, Ivory Coast, and the West African countries, suffered from a combination of issues: unpredictable rain, severe drought. We had, they had some disease as well in the crops and so on. And suddenly, and of course, this rain and drought were extreme because of climate change. And so we're thinking about a single supplier that supplies most of the cocoa in the world, and it can't do that. The supply went down some 13, 14%, but then that's at the source, but then it affected chains all the way to the point where the prices of cocoa quadrupled to historic highs. And you say, well, this is what happens when you have a single source. Now, cocoa is an example of geography as well. There aren't too many places in the world. But how do we think about these kinds of shocks in different situations? What separates the teams that manage these kinds of shocks? They don't have to be the perfect predictors. But what you want to do is constantly think about climate signals and other signals as well. You want to think about them because usually they are visible way earlier than the prices of commodities change. And that's a fact. You can look at it in many different commodities markets. You need to know where your supplier sits. Are your supplier sites in floodplains? Which facilities and processes require reliable energy? Which parts of your supply chain require lots of water? What are your weather-sensitive raw materials? Which critical shipping lanes depend upon canals like the Panama and the Suez Canal? We have seen, I don't have to repeat the geopolitics of the moment even, to think about all kinds of issues that you might have in this kind of a situation. If you run an international supply chain today, you have to worry about upcoming regulation related to climate. The European regulation on has a carbon tax now, the cross-border carbon mechanism, carbon border adjustment mechanism, the CBAM. When you think about CBAM, if you are a European company and today you are importing iron and steel from India and China, you are getting hit with a huge tax. And when you think about these kinds of companies, it's not just that these companies are at risk and you're always thinking about this in terms of risk. It becomes an opportunity for a company that is providing steel, clean
Kothare?
steel. Sorry, did I hear someone? Okay. I'm watching Jessica carefully to make sure that I follow your cues here. Um, you want to ask the question again. This is not an either or. It's not, oh, efficiency is good or bad, resiliency is good or bad. It's a judgment call. How much efficiency do you give up today? In real, when you give up efficiency, you're giving up real margin. That your boss will see this quarter, but you're trying to survive a disruption that might not come for years and might happen on someone else's watch. We're all human, we have incentives. And so when you think about efficiency versus supply chain being beside efficient supply chains versus climate resilient supply chains, you want to think about these decisions not in a black and white framework, but with judgment. And that's what you want to start learning again. It's this question of what assumptions can I make? What assumptions can I defend? And what assumptions are my bosses or my peers not looking at that might give me an advantage? That's where the money is about to be. As I keep saying, this is not all doom and gloom. Climate has brought about significant opportunities. Anybody's threat is someone else's opportunity, correct? So that's where this transition is going to go. It's not just about destroying value, but it's also moving it. Who's going to win these for its customers as well as yourself, this extra value? It changes, right? Who wins? Let's go back to our own grocer. For this one grocer, many things could happen. Uh, you could find people who can provide you smarter refrigeration. It's, if you've seen Project Drawdown in your climate conversations, if you haven't, it's worth looking at. Smart refrigeration is one of the top, I think it's the top interventions that we can make today to reduce global carbon emissions. Uh, we have many technologies for it, and they're being produced. Some are more expensive today, but they will eventually get cheaper. Um, you know, think about simple things. In every company, we should be thinking about lower energy warehouses. It doesn't matter whether you are a big climate change advocate or rather climate action advocate or not. These are cost-saving mechanisms. These are resource-saving mechanisms. You've got to be thinking about that before you build. And I say this, it sounds very logical when I start to bring this up, and it seems elementary. But you'd be surprised at how many buildings are being built today without thinking about that. Or, at the margin, someone makes a judgment saying, yeah, we wanted to do this in this building for sustainability reasons, but we're just going to drop it because it's not worth my time, or it's not worth me losing my job on it, or any other number of reasons. So we've got to be thinking about how we structure the entire company to think about these things. Grocery stores can start thinking about different products as well, more drought-resistant foods. Think about working with regenerative farmers. That's something that HB, for instance, does a lot. We are seeing a lot of companies today doing work with carbon insets, working with some of the largest companies. When you can think about all the packaged goods that we eat, the junk food that we eat, or the good food that we eat in packages, they're all working with farmers today to figure out how to create the best possible soil and the best possible uh, crop, so that the emissions are the least, the use of resources is as little as possible. And they're not doing it out of charity. These are large multinational companies. They're doing it because they know that it is in their best interest. It's more profitable for them. And of course, AI. We're seeing things in grocery stores and supermarkets today. We're seeing AI-driven technology to figure out where the food waste is, and that itself is a huge environmental issue today. We're seeing my own students are developing some of these things. And for those of you with an entrepreneurial bent of mind, this is such a huge and exciting area. All kinds of climate tech, energy tech. We are seeing more and more students participating in competitions. I've just seen the curve over the decade. It's a fascinating time to be a young entrepreneur. AI has upended our lives, of course, for good and bad. It is a conversation that you will have later, today, I believe, or tomorrow. But in this general event, certainly, people are using AI to do a lot of good work for them to cut waste like food waste, cut energy as well. But in itself, it's a technology that's demanding a huge amount of power, huge amount of water for cooling and so on, and land that communities have started fighting over. And so we have to think about AI in two different dimensions. And I'm not going to go too far on this. It is a huge event, environmentally speaking, because you have someone else talking about it. But you have to ask yourself, and I'll pause for a minute to let you think about this. Is AI a climate solution or is it a climate cost? And to me, it's neither. I mean, or rather, it's both, right? It's not either or, it's both. And we've got to start thinking about it that way. We've got to ask ourselves, can we hold both these truths in our hand at the same time and work towards solutions? Again, we're asking what assumptions are becoming unreliable. As we get to know more about AI, who's are today's winners going to stay the winners? Who's going to run into problems? Just a few days ago, New York State became the first state to put a moratorium on hyperscale data centers. You can see these kinds of policy, these are transition risks, right? We talk about. You've got to think about these and ask the same question. Which assumptions are becoming unreliable? And can I use those to create an opportunity for myself, either through starting my own company, or if you are working in a large company, innovating within that large company? I highly encourage students to take an entrepreneurship class only because it teaches you skills that you need to have today, those entrepreneurship skills that you need, especially in this space, I think are very useful for you to have. And so that's something that you don't sometimes hear in your classic traditional classes. Design thinking, systems thinking, all of these tools are very useful. My own experience started in sales, and I can tell you it was the best first job to ever have. All right. So we've stayed inside the business, which is typically what MBA programs often do. We try to think about the company as a unit in class. We think about the financial model of the company. We think about its operations. We think about opportunities for that company to build a competitive edge. What we don't often think about is what it relies on that it doesn't own, and that's not inside the company. company is really an ecosystem. And I'm going to talk about two very briefly. One is the partnerships. Look what happened with New York State regulations. This is in response to a lot of communities complaining about AI because it's taking up space, it's taking up grid capacity. They don't want these big ugly things around them, etc. But if some of these AI companies have thought about working with communities first, some of this might, and it will start now. They are beginning to think about this. We can find a solution. You also need a network of partners outside of business to help you think through some of these issues. Like HEB, for instance, has a huge network of partners during these storms, during our Hurricane Harvey, which was yet another climactic event in Texas a few years ago. Well, it's almost a decade now. But just catastrophic kinds of events that are happening with increasing frequency. They had amazing relationships in the community that allowed them to function and to reach more people than they ever could. Public agencies, even having relationships with utilities and the grid for all the AI companies that are starting up data centers, food banks, relief orgs. This is not, again, I want to emphasize, this is not charity. This is about good business. It is a strategic capability. This is about systems thinking, which is something you will learn later um, in Climate Catalyst. And so you'll do an En-ROADS workshop, and that will really bring this home. You really want to think about the things that you can do alone and really start to partner with. And especially when it comes to climate, we've had global coalitions. We have many such partnerships that are allowing us to have a body that's an arbiter for some of the really hard conversations that we're having. And firms are eager to participate in them. But the issue becomes when you have to talk across sectors. And this is, again, something for those of you who came from outside the business sector to really lean on. How do you talk in the culture, the norms, the languages of participants from other sectors? This is becoming a key skill. So really start to think about how you can work across the lines and across sectors. Again, the assumption that is becoming unreliable now is that the firm is a unit and that it can get its competitive edge by holding everything on its own. The assumption now is that you've got to go out and look at some partners that you've never thought about before. Another big part of climate business is nature and ecosystem services. We often don't think about them, but I would like to remind you to pay attention to this as well. The grocery store, our hypothetical grocery store, owns none of this. These are systems we depend upon: water, soil, pollinators, stable growing seasons, farmers whom you can help stay in business. And this is another big, huge problem in many parts of the world. We moved away from agrarian economies, and it's becoming harder and harder. Here in the US, we have an issue of farmers' children not wanting to do the same business. So young farmers are few and far between. And so, from a grocery store's perspective, anything it can do to help with these suppliers remaining reliable is important. Again, cocoa, that was a great example. Your customers did not see cocoa as, oh, there was a drought somewhere in West Africa, and so the prices of the commodity went up. What they see when they meet climate is the price of chocolate went up. And why am I seeing these prices? Right? And the same thing with cooking oil and eggs and coffee. They're not going to talk climate to you. They're going to ask why price is going up. And so, again, also being able to communicate that is an important part of being a climate specialist. Well, I don't even want to call you a climate specialist necessarily. You are going on to becoming MBAs, but you need to know enough about it to be good at the business of climate. Some of these commodities are not going to stay cheap forever. A lot of things we assume, water especially, is going. We have not priced water into our business system, and someday it is going to come back and um, cause us a lot of trouble. And so we've got to be asking ourselves, how do we start to think about the price of all of this? Okay, so I've spent nearly all my time here talking to you about why all of this matters for business. I have a couple of quick slides and I'm going to go through them really quickly. They're sort of optional, but I wanted to bring home this point that, you know, as you come into your MBA programs, I know you're facing some headwinds. The headlines would suggest that the field is going backward, it's collapsing. Um, that's not true. If you really look at what's happening, it's cyclical. And some of the retreat has actually been healthy, I would say. There were a lot of corporate pleasures. And when you looked, oh, we'll be net zero by 2030, whatever. When you really looked inside, there was no transition plan. There were targets, but there was no plan to achieve them. So I think, walking those back has been healthy. Um, Disclosure rules are being contested, rolled back, even in Europe. Some of this is bound to happen. The accounting profession did not happen in a day. The financial accounting, the traditional accounting profession has been around for almost 100 years now, and it is still evolving. So this is going to happen. The push pull is going to happen, but um, you know this is where you come in. There are some alliances that you'll hear, oh, this shut down, that shut down because this one walked away. But the structural stuff is not changing. The climate is changing. Physical risk is one directional. Capital markets are asking for information about this. Investors do not want stranded assets at the end of it. They want to make sure that their investments are safe. So think of the structural change. Keep your keep yourself focused on that and it's forcing us all to be disciplined about it. My generation had to work at a time when there was no structure for this. I spent 10 years of my career in traditional finance trying to figure out how to bring these things in. It took me a while because we didn't know how to report it, how to fund it, how to build a career out of it. And we're still here. But you now have the hard task of making this sing at a time when it's not maybe it doesn't strike you as the most fun time to be in there, but I will suggest that you are arriving with some infrastructure, you're arriving with a seat at the table, potential careers in it, and you can prove this out. You can make the case. You have the hard job, yes, but it's also so much fun to enter a field where there is so much space for innovation, for clear thinking, for new thinking like systems thinking. All these are fun things. And I think you're going to enjoy yourself if you do this. Not only that, you will be ahead of the people who don't ask this hard question. What assumptions behind all our business decisions are changing because of the climate? I put up a whole bunch of questions here, depending upon which area you go into. You can take a look at this slide later, but that is the basic question you should be asking. Don't wait to take a sustainability course or consider it as an elective. This has to be your thinking in each course if you really are serious about climate action. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We have a few minutes for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Meeta. That was fantastic. And I'd like to really quickly build on that last point is, I'd encourage you all not just to ask yourself that question about, the assumptions, but ask it out loud. Start to try and drive this conversation with your peers, with your professors, and I think that impact will just be magnified. So question for you, Meeta.
Hmm.
Given the uncertainty and changes we've seen, especially over the last few years, especially in the headlines, how are companies maintaining their momentum when they can't necessarily use some of the same words, or they're choosing not to? Are they reframing? Are they reprioritizing? How are you seeing some of these companies handle these challenges?
I think a little bit of everything. I think, and it's a good thing because, I just led a session in the Netherlands a few weeks ago, and the conversation was whose job is it to be the sustainability officer today? Increasingly, it's moving into every department of the company, and the CFO's office, particularly, because they need to know what the investors want. They need to know what the customer wants. They may not sound like the marketing people, but they need to know because that's when they're making the decision, right? So, what I am seeing, and this is not just a sales pitch, honestly, what I'm seeing is that there are some who are behind in this, and there are some who have dropped it. There's no question about that, especially here in the US. But it is short-sighted because no matter where you are in the world, regulations from Europe and other regions are going to hit you because most places, most companies today have international supply chains. And if you go through Europe for any part of your business, you are subject to those regulations. So that's number one. Number two, you yourself, from a business perspective, are not going to be as resilient as the ones who are planning for it. So that's one set of companies. But the vast majority are doing the work inside the company because it has already begun. And what they're doing is, yes, it's under different names, and it's not just because it's sort of green hushing. It's under different names because people have realized it is everybody's job. And so you might find someone who's your procurement manager. But, oh, and I see this really in my work because we have a consulting program and we see people coming from all these kinds of jobs asking us to help them because you have a procurement manager and now that person has to ask their suppliers questions about whether they are sustainable because the regulations ask you for your emissions across your value chain, what we call scope one, two, three, not just the emissions from the energy you purchase or own, but also from your product all the way through its life cycle. So if these questions come up, you have to ask all your partners up and downstream these questions. You yourself, if you are a supplier, you get asked these questions. So everyone is having to learn about sustainability. So what I'm seeing is there are people who don't realize that they're doing a sustainability job and are actually doing it. So my answer to you is the vast majority are moving forward. There are some who have dropped, and I think a lot of those are the ones who were skeptical about it in the first place, just doing it to mark off some stuff. It was very superficial there. And that's not to say that some are not because of the situation we find ourselves in. They'll come back.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, we can't get to the rest of the questions because we're at our time.
Sorry.
No, you did a wonderful job. It's so much information. We will share Meeta's slides and recording out with everyone. If you have any resources you want to share with the group, feel free to
Yes.
send them to me and I'll distribute them after the fact.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
I think yeah, I will answer this person's question later. I see something. If you want to send it to my email, I'll answer that question.
awesome. We're going to wrap up. Meeta, thank you so much. Really fantastic discussion and framing of how and why all of us should be thinking about these issues, regardless of where we end up in different companies. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'd also like to thank our attendees for joining us. As a reminder, there's a lot of different ways to get involved with ClimateCat, so be sure to make sure you're connected to us through all of our different channels. And lastly, wanted to highlight our next two sessions coming up in about 15 minutes. We have Navigating Climate Career Options, which is going to be a fantastic conversation. And then we have our first Climate Connect, which is networking by region after that. So we'll end there for this session. Again, Meeta, thank you. Attendees, thank you. And we'll see you all soon.